Welcome back to another episode of CamBro Conversations, and today we are talking about becoming fearless and overcoming adversity. To do so, we are joined by somebody that certainly accomplished that, Mr. Jack Kavanagh. Jack is a coach, speaker, pharmacist, and the host of the Only Human podcast. Jack, a guest today. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. How are you?
Yeah, I'm really well, and I'm excited to dive into this one. And for the listeners, like many of the guests that I've been lucky enough to have on in recent times, I've gone exploring and fallen down the rabbit hole of their content and thought their own story as a host is fantastic in terms of how they bring out quality and different guests with your podcast, the Only Human podcast. But your own story itself as well is equally powerful, and it's let's get it out there to my audience, Jack.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm just delighted to be here and what you're doing is creating an incredible atmosphere and tribe around you. So I'm delighted to be a part of it.
That's the plan anyway, Jack. So for those that haven't encountered you before, I've mentioned that you're a coach, a speaker, a qualified pharmacist. What else would you like to share with us at this stage in terms of a background?
Yeah, so I think I begin by saying that my story is just your story written in different words. And that's before I really tell you anything about my life. And the reason I say that is if for a moment you imagine a heart rate monitor, um, in life we often think like, wouldn't it be wonderful if I had an ambition or a goal or a place I wanted to get to, and if I went in a straight line from point A to point B. And when you think about a heart rate monitor, if you go from one side to the other, the game is over and you're dead. So really what I think about a reflection of life is that up and down of the heartbeat on the heart rate monitor. And it's those ups and downs that remind us that we're human. It's those highs and lows that are the things that give us perspective. We don't know what it is to have a good time in our life if we haven't had a challenging time. We don't know what it is to experience loss if we haven't loved someone. We don't know what it is to have victory if we haven't had a setback. And so that's why I would say that my story is your story written in different words, because it's very much a trajectory of highs and lows that each one of us have in our own lives. Um, but coming through my teenage years, um, if you're asking me briefly how else I would define myself, I think the roles that the titles that you've read out there are probably what society sees. But
Yeah.
yesterday I was actually at a funeral, um, albeit online, and it was really interesting for me to see how um, the sons and daughters of this man that had passed away spoke about him. And he was a business owner, he was a small business owner, and that was mentioned. But really, people talked about the fact that he was a dad and he was a brother and he was a son and he was a friend. And I think they're things that I would value more highly, I suppose, than any of the other titles that I would hold. Um, but in my own life, coming through my teenage years, I was really badly dyslexic as a young kid, largely written off as a problem child,
Yeah.
and probably with pretty good reason. Like in one of the first days in primary school, my mum got called in because I jocked one of the girls. Um, Curiosity got the better of me, I think. Um, but I slowly started to get help that I needed, and I learned how to apply myself. And as I went into my secondary school years in Ireland, I really became quite a diligent guy, and um, the balance between work and play really became important to me. And I was really passionate about sports, particularly rugby and running and windsurfing. Windsurfing was like this absolute passion for me. It was the place where I found flow. It was that place where I was pushing my edge all of the time. Rugby was a place where I understood what it meant to be part of a team and to work towards a shared objective and my place in that. And I often sort of tended towards more of a leadership role within a team, or orchestrating or pulling the strings at out half. And then running was a place where I was just with my thoughts, and you kind of learn things from that as well. It's like you can't give it 100% every day. um on when you're running, there's certain days that you're capable of more, and then there's other days where you have to navigate that inner voice, and the voice that says you can't do it today, and to challenge that voice. And the beauty about running and windsurfing as solitary sports, um or individual sports, was I think it allows you to acquaint yourself with the extent to which you can challenge your own limits. And so they were really nice things to learn. But during those years of secondary education, it was also a time when I started to develop some of my keen interests, which were really around people, and health. And I was really passionate about people and health. And um, there are years as well where you're questioning absolutely everything. And I questioned like my body image, my sense of myself, how I fit in, the religion I was being brought up in. You're pushing out against your comfort zone and asking all these questions. And as I transitioned towards college, I found myself studying pharmacy in Trinity College in Dublin. And I can remember like two dramatic things changing that year. Having been in a boarding school with 400 guys for 6 years, all of a sudden I was introduced to this whole other gender, and that was a big learning curve for me. And it was a great time for that. And the other thing was like I was for the first time in control of when the lights went out. And so we had good fun that year. And I can remember heading down to the west of Ireland after exams, and it's this place that had kind of become a sanctuary to me, and it's where I would go to work during the summers as a windsurfing instructor and as a lifeguard.
Yeah.
And on one of the first days down there that summer, I cycled off to a beach called Ellie Beach, and I was all by myself. I leant my bike up against the sand dune, and I can remember walking out onto the sand. And as I walked down the beach and sat down, the sun is gently setting over the breaking waves, and I just catch myself in the moment. I just caught myself smiling. And it was kind of the first time that I can really remember that I was consciously aware that I was getting comfortable with myself. I was consciously aware that I was proud of the work that I'd put in to get where I was going, and that I was excited about where I was going,
Yeah.
that I was happy with the people that were around me, and that they were both stimulating me and challenging, that I felt accepted, but I was also seen as an individual. And all of these kind of things were coming together. The questions I'd asked as a teenager, I was starting to get answers to them. And I was in a really good place within myself. And I had no idea that at the end of that summer, like my whole life would change. Um, on the first day of a holiday, I was in Portugal with some of my best mates at the end of that summer. And as I'd done so many times that day and that summer, I ran down the beach. I dived into the water over a wave with no idea of how shallow the water was. And my head collided with the sandbank. And in that moment, I broke my neck. And, you know, moments before, I was this young, fit, active guy, so much independence, and really felt like I had the world at my feet. And in an instant, I went to a position where I couldn't move anything from my armpits down, or
Yeah.
from my neck down at the time. And I was face down in the water. And the irony of it was is that I was probably the best placed out of my mates with my training to deal with that situation. And time kind of slows down. And I just saw in my mind, I saw my mum and my dad, I saw my two sisters, I saw the dog Poppy. I thought about the lads on the beach, and I wondered if they'd get to me on time. And if they didn't, how would they deal with that?
Yeah.
And it's that kind of moment where just life flashes in front of you. And I wasn't sad, like, or anything. I was really aware of what had just happened and the possible implications of it. But you kind of you just hope that you get to keep going.
Yeah.
And luckily, I was taken from the water, and I woke up in intensive care the following morning.
Yeah, Jack. I mean, I was absolutely wrapped in your story there, and I think so much to come out of that and unpack as we go into this episode. I think first things first, the perspective that you've got in terms of that heart rate analogy that you've used there, I think that's incredible for many of us to think about in terms of when we put our own lives into perspective in this age of comparison, which we've all fallen into through social media and all sorts of other different influencers around us. But ultimately, like you say, we all just take different paths, and it's the same story but written in different words, which I think is a very powerful statement to open the podcast on. And I guess the second thing that really struck me, Jack, before we come to this hugely life-changing incident, was your progression as a young man. This, like you say, maybe a bit rebellious kid in primary school, but unruly, not quite fitting in with the kind of teaching environment because maybe of your dyslexia making you feel not as comfortable in class, but then working to become somebody that was doing a pharmacy degree, so obviously clearly very intelligent and achieving high level results. And within that, your level of actualization about the sports that you played and your different roles that you played within the team sport rugby as the out half, the fly half, the Johnny Sexton, the Ron O'Gara. If I'm going to bring some Irish examples, see, I know all about the Irish rugby.
On the ball.
So your role as a team player within that and the lessons that you took from that, it's almost like you would say in an interview in a CV in terms of, oh, what did you learn from playing rugby? You've got that in your head and completely registered. And then equally, when you talk about the solo aspects of pushing your body and finding your limits within running and knowing that not every day is going to be perfect and that you go beyond that, for you to have learnt that, do you think you felt that fully at the time, or do you think and we'll get on to kind of the impact of your accident, do you think you felt that as fully at the time as you do now on reflection?
So I think they're kind of things that I was maybe a little bit aware of um, at the time. Like I for example with the rugby, like I knew that I enjoyed a lot being the guy pulling the strings um at out half. I just enjoyed that position of being involved in the decision making and so on, and naturally that was something that I really enjoyed with the running stuff. Like they were really things that I grasped, was that like if I want to shave a second off my time today, like that's actually on me. That's something that I can put effort towards, you know. But someone much wiser than me, I think it was Steve Jobs, said we can only connect the dots looking backwards. And when I look back now, I can see, oh yeah, that was the value, and that's really what I learned there. And I had a vague awareness of it at the time, um, but I think I can see it more clearly when I look back.
That interests me, and I suspected that might be the case. And like you say, Steve Jobs has put it into words better than potentially we could today. But certainly, when we reflect on our childhood experiences and the different activities we got involved in, we can often see how it shaped us moving forward. And it's clear that you have an understanding of the different pieces of your personality that were maybe being shaped at that stage through the sports that you played and the different areas that you enjoyed. So that team manager or kind of director, that's probably reflected now in maybe some of your coaching that you've got involved in.
Yeah, well, I think very much the coaching work, I see myself more of as a facilitator.
Yeah.
And I think as a good out half, that's really what you are, is you're facilitating the players around you to show off what they can do.
Yeah.
And every now and then you hope to come in with a moment of inspiration yourself. um, but uh, and you're pulling the strings on the so a lot of the work that I would do would be within groups, um, in terms of a coaching capacity. And I think you're pulling the strings, and it's the equivalent of, okay, now's the right time to kick for touch, or actually we need to pull people in for a bit of a chat here. And so yeah, I probably I could pull analogies all day about, now that you've made me aware of it, the analogies between, say, the role of that, uh, almost like a management role, and or being a facilitator, and how that corresponds to some of the things I'm doing now. It's really interesting, actually.
Well, that's what struck me initially when you were describing it, Jack. That's what struck me as coming out of that. And then ultimately, the fact that you'd felt like you were kind of finding yourself, so to speak. And I think maybe a lot of us go through that in the early stages of university, of college, when we're getting a little bit older, where we're a little bit more comfortable. We have that time away from home, maybe, where you've got you've got you've got maybe more external influences, but also more time alone to assess things. Like you say, you've not got that kind of discipline and structure of when the lights go out and when you need to go up for breakfast in the boarding house. It's more about, will I go to class today? Yes. Will I study for that test? Maybe. And there's a lot more freedom to that. And then ultimately, in that summer in Portugal, this significant life event occurred when you were in a place, like you said, of great independence and great experience. And that was, maybe, if you were to look at it from a negative perspective, that was taken away from you at that point. How did you start to deal with that initially, in those initial stages where you wake up in intensive care and you're looking around and you're thinking, wow, that was a big accident that I've just been in?
Yeah, like I was knocked out. I was air ambulanced, or by helicopter from just off the beach, to the hospital, and I was knocked out, or sedated. And when I woke up, I can remember becoming aware of my surroundings, and the screws and the light fitting above my head, the then becoming aware that a metal cage around my head that made me almost look, I suppose, like Frankenstein. I had tubes in my nose
Yeah.
to keep me hydrated and fed, tubes going down my throat to keep me breathing. And you when you notice some of those things, you are reminded of the gravity of the scenario. Um, and just at that moment that I started to become aware of all of this, a little while later, one of my best friends, Gareth, walked around the bottom of the bed, and he has this like smiling but tear filled face, and I couldn't speak because I had tubes in my mouth, but I just mouthed the words, it's going to be okay. And I was reassuring myself as much as him. I didn't really know what that meant. Um, and in the time after that, my parents flew over. Um, and I later learned that on the plane, my dad and mum were chatting, and mum kept saying to dad, well, like, why Jack? Why would this happen to Jack?
Mm.
And dad responded, and he said, well, why not Jack? Why should this have happened to anybody else on the beach? Like, why would we be so lucky that this wouldn't happen to us? And I existed in that why me place at times, and soon realized that that is important for grieving, and we go back there every now and then, but it also keeps me in a victim mentality. And so flipping the question to why not me became a really powerful and liberating thing, and it gave me some control and choice. But as soon as my parents walked in to intensive care, one came over to either side of me, and I'd put the strong face on for my friends, and then my parents were there, and the first thing I said was, I just started crying, and I said I did nothing wrong. And I was almost like, it was an acknowledgement that, like, I wasn't going to get in trouble. Do like, that was never going to be
Yeah.
the case. But it was like an acknowledgement that, like, life is actually really hard sometimes,
Yeah.
and I actually did nothing wrong here. Like, this is brutally unfair. um it's like unbelievably hard, the fact that I was just having fun on the beach with my mates, and this happened. And as hard as it is, there's nothing I can do to change it. It
Yeah.
happened. And so it's reckoning with that. And, you know, shit hits the fan for all of us in different ways in our lives. Could be a relationship breakdown. It could be a loss of a job. It could be an injury or something like happened to me, a health challenge of some sort, or any number of other things,
Yeah.
natural disaster. And as much as we might like reality to look a bit different, the reality is as it is. And once we create a bit of space to come to terms or some sort of acceptance with that, it's about, well, what am I going to do with this?
Yeah.
And how do I move forward? And I think that's the place where the rubber meets the road, you know, um and you kind of test your metal, and it's a thing of, you know, not every day is a good day, and in anything that we do, we don't get it 100% right every day, and that's completely fine, because if 51% of the time you can choose to say, yes, I can, I'll give it a go, I'll get up, I'll keep fighting, I'll try again. You know, if you say that and act on those things 51% of the time, you're moving in the right direction.
Yeah, really powerful insight into your mind there, Jack, from that initial, like you say, that brave face with your friends and that mantra that you were probably saying to them, but also repeating to yourself, as I've heard you say before, of it's going to be okay. And of course, those walls have to probably come down in front of mum and dad, the people that you're closest to in the world, and the tears come out, and maybe some of that kind of maybe feeling a little bit more like a child. And I know you've spoken about being fearless like a child before as one of your phrases, but that kind of feeling of being a child, like I don't want to get in trouble, like I did nothing wrong, like you said, it was something that you'd done countless times throughout that holiday. You were an experienced windsurfer, you jumped into countless seas and oceans, and it just so happened at that time the depth below that wave was such that you got your injury. And the key, I mean, there were so many phrases within that, but one of the phrases, why not me, and switching between that and the term you used, which was kind of embracing of the victimhood of why should it be me, was that one of the key components in helping you move forward as the Jack Kavanagh that we see nowadays today?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, I don't think that's like a question that it's called, it would be known in psychology as a cognitive reframe, you know, why me, why not me? And in between those questions is some level of coming to terms. It's the grieving process, you know, and the grieving process is denial and anger and depression and bargaining and then some level of acceptance, and you go through them all in one day and in 10 minutes and over months, and you jump in from one to the other, and yeah, it's that space in between, but it's a cognitive reframe of going from why me to why not me. And I think when you do that, it gives you, it allows you to give yourself permission to start taking some of the steps that are going to be helpful. Another thing that I said at that time, and because I couldn't speak, we used to almost do predictive texting. So
Okay.
some of the guys would be on one side of the bed, and some others on the opposite side, and they would say consonant or vowel, and I would like blink one side or the other, and we'd start spelling stuff out. We got really fast at this, you know, in the old style phones where it was
Yeah.
like the predictive texting. And um so we'd be going through, and I was on pain medication at the time, and so I woke up a bit delirious, and everyone was there, and it became apparent that I wanted to say something. And um I must have imagined that I was in like an American football like type of movie, but I spelled out "victory is forever,"
Yeah.
and I still wonder what I meant by that. But I think what I meant by it is like those little wins that I make are completely unique to me, and they're mine, and nobody can take them away. And the little win for anybody today will look totally different to somebody else. You know, the little wins for me today were drank 3 liters of water. I'm well hydrated. The little win is that I had I had a hot lemon drink in the morning. That was something on my to-do list.
Yeah.
The little win was that I got a workout in this morning, even though it was short. You know, the little wins might be that I caught myself in a negative thinking pattern and I caught myself and challenged it. The little win might be when I was going to snap at someone that I had that moment of awareness and held back, you know, and said what I needed to say more respectfully. But whatever it might be, I think what I meant at that time was victory is forever. It was like those little victories along the journey of me, I suppose, using this as an opportunity, this event that happened to me as an opportunity to learn and to grow and to develop rather than as an end point. And every little victory along that journey was mine, and it was something that couldn't be taken away.
Yeah, just again another kind of incredible insight into how you started to reframe and move forward and take steps towards being the human that you are today and overcoming something that could easily have completely put you back into your shell and put you in a much more dark place and become a lot more dependent on others for your happiness, whereas you're very able to achieve that yourself. And I think when we talk about victories forever, like you say, maybe it sounds like something Al Pacino might say in an American football film, like that kind of inch by inch speech that he does, which is
I
legendary.
I literally had that speech on record. I used to listen to it before rugby matches.
Yeah, I think a lot of us did to get up for rugby, didn't we? Yeah, I love that. And I think because you've brought that to the table, a lot of the discussions we've had in the podcast in recent months have been on uh, habits and compounding, and the small habits and the small wins and the small victories, they add up over time to a position where we're much better. So like you say, if you are drinking your 3 liters of water, if you're getting your workout in the morning, no matter how small or short it is, it's another vote for you to be the kind of person that you want to be. Likewise, you were saying around um reacting to negative like self-talk or or thoughts that you're having and catching yourself in that. As you start to catch yourself in that, that will become natural for you to do that over time, and it becomes a small win. So I guess my question
Mm.
for you, Jack, off the back of that would be, what were some of the small victories that you started to get once you left the hospital bed for the first time?
Yeah, well, you know, it was a long journey because I spent a few weeks in intensive care in Portugal. I was air ambulanced home, intensive care in Dublin. I nearly didn't make it. I got very sick there.
Yeah.
Um, High dependency unit, and finally out to rehab. And you know, my first job was literally like a child having the umbilical cord. I was learning to breathe again, and then the reality was is that I had about 15% muscle function. So my shoulders, my biceps, and my wrists, and that I was using that to become as physically independent as I possibly could. And I have no use of my fingers or my hands, which complicated everything. Learning how to pick things up and weave things between my fingers, and you know, everything from brushing my teeth to feeding myself was something that I had to learn again. Um, then navigating the world on wheels. Everyone wanted me in a power chair, and I wanted a manual chair, and you know, all of these little battles. And I think probably the most vivid that I can give you is the manual wheelchair journey. And I could give you any number over the years, but I decided that I had this image of myself as a fit young independent guy, and that just didn't marry up for me with a powered wheelchair.
Yeah.
And I decided that against the best evidence that I wanted to use a manual. And I remember going to my first occupational therapy session and telling the OT this. Miriam is her name, and she completely bought in. This was my goal. I wanted to push my own wheelchair, um and that day we set about it. And I didn't know at the time. I thought I was pushing myself across the room, and she was giving me a little push behind, saying, "Oh, keep it up. You're doing it yourself, you know." And she was instilling the belief in me that I could do this. And as time went on, my left shoulder had been really badly affected compared to my right with the way the injury had happened. It was almost like my left shoulder was completely collapsed. Um, and so I had no power and very different control in my left shoulder. And I can remember days, and bear in mind that the hospital and the rehab is perfectly set up for a wheelchair to navigate it. I couldn't get out of the ward because there was this tiny little lip on the uh, threshold between the
Yeah.
door and the hallway. Going down the hallway, I can remember one Sunday, um, pushing down the hallway, and the way that the floor was laid, the it pulled me towards the wall, and I crashed into the wall, and I just burst out crying because, like, physically, I didn't have the strength or the control in my body to get away from that wall. I can remember eventually getting myself down to the lift and then not having the control in my arms to push the button, and it was the little stretch over time. And I can remember the guy in the bed beside me had a different injury and he was relearning to walk. And we used to go down after a couple of months, and we used to go downstairs, and there was a quadrangle, and we would practice walking laps, and I was faster than him. So my goal would be to try and catch up with him and to lap him. Um, and so we were each sort of egging each other on, and over time that became just incremental progress, and you just keep showing up in small ways every day. And it's the same with anything that we want to do, whether it's writing, whether it's going to the gym, getting fitter. Like, to be fitter, you have to get fitter.
Yeah.
And you get fitter by doing the small things every day. If you want to be able to push your wheelchair, you have to get better at pushing your wheelchair. And that happens by doing small things regularly. And I think um there's a big gulf in society now, in that we have so many things with immediacy that we we don't want to do the things that it takes often to get to where we want to be. And um and so that leads to a level maybe of discontent. Whereas, and we talked maybe a little bit about a friend of ours, or a guy that we admire, who's big into stoicism. The Stoics would really talk about doing the small thing, what you can control, and the only thing you can control is your thought, your action, and the way that you perceive the events in your life. And if you can regularly check in with that, and do small things every day, within a short space of time, you can find yourself in a very different position.
Completely resonate with what you said there, Jack. And I think when you're talking about these experiences you had, particularly within the hospital, as you started to try and regain some of your strength in order to have the ability to use the manual chair, like you say, it didn't fit with your identity and how you wanted to see yourself as a independent, fit young man who had an element of control of his life that he didn't want to give away to a powered chair. And I first of all, I really respect that, and I think it speaks volumes for who you are as a person, and the kind of character that you have. But equally, for you to continue to get back up after incidents like getting all the way to the left, and that being an achievement for starters. But then when you go to push the button, I still haven't developed that control, and that's enough to kind of dishearten you in some ways. But you continue to go on, like you said, you started to get into a kind of friendly competition with your fellow person in the hospital ward, and you built that kind of back and forth with each other to see, can we get better at this? Can I get better than you were? Can I get better than I was yesterday? And that all adds up, like you say, while also exploring. And this is a kind of, you'll have the listeners laughing down their AirPods at this, but delayed gratification. You talked there about immediacy of sometimes we want something. So we want a takeaway. We can or we want food, we want dinner, we can order a takeaway and delivery app on our phone. It'll be here in 15 minutes. We want to watch a film, we can touch the button, it's on Netflix. Everything is so immediate. Whereas a lot of the things that we actually really care about, like you say, progression within the ability to maneuver ourselves around in the wheelchair, ability for us to get fitter within the gym, ability for us to progress within our careers, they take a little bit more of the small daily actions. And your story on a higher end of the scale is a fantastic example of going through those daily actions to get to where you want to be. And I think it relates back to that point at the start where you talked about the heart rate and how you talked about many of our stories are very much the same, but they're just written in different words.
Yeah, and like life is completely, it's imperfect. And that's kind of like the beauty of it, is that like if it was all a straight line, there would be nothing to appreciate, you know, because we wouldn't have the perspective to appreciate those things. And even you can apply that analogy to relationships. You know, if you want to have a better relationship, you need to do the things day in day out that lead to a good relationship. You know, I my girlfriend is living in Midlands in Ireland, and with the restrictions, we see very little of each other, and it's challenging, and yet every day you have to show up and check in and give the words of encouragement on the hard days, and have the open honest conversations, and find things to laugh and have still have in common when you're not seeing each other, and all of those things, and be there for the hard times and the good, you know, like it's the unglamorous shit that when you
Yeah.
look back is that's the bones of life, like. Um and I need as much reminding of that, by the way, as anyone. Like, I can only talk about this because these are the things that I grapple with in life, and I think we all grapple with these things.
Yeah, of course we do. One of the most powerful things that I've heard you say is that so often we look outwardly for heroes and we forget the magic we have within ourselves. First of all,
Mm.
some people may hold you up as a hero in some respects, and I don't know whether you're comfortable with that. And sometimes, but sometimes you should just embrace that. I think is would be my message to you. But my question off the back of that would be: how do you identify your magic, or how can some of the listeners identify the magic within themselves?
Yeah, so like I this is something that I believe in quite strongly, is that the modern culture has believed that we need to be different than we are. The comparison trap, as you mentioned earlier, is just so pervasive online. It's everywhere. We go on LinkedIn, we see everybody that's gotten a promotion. We go on Instagram, we see everyone that's lifting heavier than us, if that's our thing, or that has more followers, or that's in a what looks like the perfect relationship or holiday or whatever. And we see none of the behind the scenes. We know none of the daily ins and outs. We don't see the grunt work that's gone in to getting the promotion. We don't see the nepotism, you know, like
Yeah.
whatever it might be. And we discredit. We know more about other people than we do our own lives. And that's fueled by really, really good behavioral scientists that are um, deadly at what they do, and they probably get paid very well for it, for essentially what ends up being uh, leading many people to doubting themselves and comparing their lives against others in ways that aren't isn't really fair. And so I think when we come back to ourselves and actually acknowledge where we are in our life, when we acknowledge the things that we can do, that we are good at, we for example, go to viastrengths.org, VIA strengths.org. It's a strengths assessment test, and assess your strengths. And for example, some of mine are social intelligence, curiosity, love of learning, and and develop an awareness of what are the things that are really you at your core. Like, what are the things that represent you? Have a think about your values and the things that you really value. Like, for me, some of my values are courage and compassion and playfulness and presence and commitment. And they show up in all parts of my life. And like when I'm at my best, they're the things that I'm focused on. And if I can become aware of my strengths and the things that I value, and think about some goals that are meaningful to me in my life, or ambitions even, or intentions that I have for how I want to be and who I want to be, rather than just the things I want to achieve. Like, they're the things that start to show us um some of the magic that we have. I think also we look outward and we say, well, isn't he incredible? Or isn't she incredible? They've overcome so much, and we discredit all the things that we've overcome. We look to others and say, wow, like I'd never have the courage to start my own business, or to run a marathon, or whatever it is. And we forget to look at the evidence of our lives and say, well, I've put in work in this area, that area, and another area, and maybe actually some of the same principles would apply if I put them to that part of my life. And all of these things, we when we put other people up on a pedestal as heroes, we minimize ourselves. And really, that person that's on the pedestal in your head has all of the same doubts and insecurities and so on. They just made some slightly different choices, and they have all the same emotions, positive and negative, that you have. They grapple with all the same things in their life. They just made some slightly different choices. And when you take them off the pedestal and bring them back down to the same level as you start to see them as much more human. Um, and you start to see yourself as much more human. And I think that gives us all a lot more permission to show up more fully, and it gives us that permission to go after some of the things that are important to us, and importantly to think about, like, who and how do we want to be. And ultimately they're the things that get remembered at the end of the day, is who and how you were. When you walk into a room of strangers, people remember how the way that you were, your presence, you know. I think the superficial shit of like what's your job title gets lost at the end of the day. Like this, I was really reminded of this yesterday at that funeral ceremony. You know, um, that stuff goes out the window. The real stuff that matters is like how you were with the person. Were you willing to celebrate with them when things are going well, and were you there for them, and to put an arm around them, or to hold space for them when they're having a hard time. You know, that's the magic of it all. And when we give ourselves and other people the space to be more human, I think everyone comes alive.
Yeah, well said, Jack. I think that particular exercise that you've done on Via Strengths has clearly been a way that you've found where your own values and strengths lie, and it's helped you to map a way forward to understand where your own magic lies as well, if we're going to use that term. And it gives you permission, like you say, to be the man, the person that you want to be. And many other people, if you're enjoying it at this point and you have jumped onto viastrengths.org, we'll pop the link in the show notes, and I'll be keen to see what people's results are from that. You can share that with Jack and I, and we'll have a chat to you about it if you do take action. However, I certainly think that when we're comfortable in what we're good at and what we want to be good at and what we want to progress in, it's a lot easier to not compare yourself to just absolutely everyone. And don't get me wrong, I actually quite like to sometimes compare myself to other people within my field where I'm putting my efforts, but not as a jealousy piece, as a, oh, okay, what are they doing? What are they taking action on? How can I aspire to get to that level? But equally being comfortable that I'm at a different stage in my journey. It's a different chapter of the book compared to theirs. And I think that's always a nice way to frame it. And I think you gave us a lot of ways to look internally and understand why we don't necessarily always need to look outwardly for like motivation and heroes. A lot of that lies internally in terms of how we see ourselves, but also the things that we do ourselves rather than the passively hoping that scrolling through Instagram is going to help us.
Yeah, and I think like when we value ourselves a bit more, um, and like you talked about earlier, like when we do the things every day to build a certain type of identity, um, as for example, many of your followers will be fitness enthusiasts, and like if you do the things every day, like if you go for the walk or the run, if you're in the gym, whatever it might be, if you're eating healthily, like you build an identity from that because the evidence of your life shows that you're someone that cares about your health, and that gives us a level of confidence and assurance in the things that are important to you. um and from that place you have like a much better sense of who you are and self-worth. And I actually had something else to share on that, and it's just slipped my mind. um it is just, oh yeah, the other thing was, you come from, if you become a little bit more clear about some of the things that are important to you, you can look at others in your field as you have done and become inspired rather
Yeah,
than becoming overwhelmed or like comparing in a negative way.
yeah, exactly.
It it becomes like an inspiring benchmark rather than a demoralizing benchmark. And that idea of inspire, it actually, the word means to breathe in. And I always think about, like, if we have like a vision for some of the things that we're trying to achieve, we need like some awareness of what are the things that we're trying to achieve, or how would we like our life to be. Because when things get tough and when it's challenging, that's the thing that gives you breath or gives you oxygen. You breathe in that, or inspire that vision, and it's an inspired vision then. And so yeah, it's just a little thing that I like to think of.
Yeah, I like that whole role reversal between, like you say, maybe hero worship and elements of admiration, but also kind of fear or devaluation through comparison. Instead, that inspired piece where we're kind of breathing in their good elements and feeling like we can try and replicate that ourselves and work towards that in a healthy way. One of the areas that I was keen to talk about today, Jack, was around proactive health and well-being and some of the things that we can learn from positive psychology to move forward with. Now, many of these I'm sure you've practiced yourself when it came to your recovery and becoming more independent. Can you share some of those with us?
Absolutely. So one of the biggest things to understand is that in our psychology we have two biases. And when I learned this, it kind of, a lot of things made sense for me. So mentally we have two biases, and the first bias is the negativity bias, and everyone will have heard of this. It's the thing that kept us safe when we were cavemen and women roaming the savannas. If we saw something in the bushes, we had to presume that it was either a snake or a lion or whatever it was. That's what kept us safe. And now some of the threats that we experience aren't necessarily going to be life changing, like if we encounter a tiger or a lion, but it might be a comment that someone made. It might be that comparison piece of, oh, that person's so much further along than I am. Like, my journey has no value, or I might as well just give up. And it often ends up as the stories in our mind. My boss sent me an email. The tone is a bit aggressive. Like, he clearly doesn't like me. I'm going to lose my job. It becomes the next thing, and the second bias. So we're programmed to notice the negative over the positive. The second bias that kicks in then is the confirmation bias. And so we have this negative story going around our mind, and the confirmation bias comes in to reaffirm that story. So if the story is, my boss doesn't like me, um, all of a sudden the confirmation bias will kick in, and you start to look at all sorts of circumstances and find the tone of his voice and the way he didn't look at you when he came into the room, or whatever else it might be. He didn't. ask me how I was in the hall today. All of these things are clearly signs like that he hates me and like I'm doomed in this company or whatever it is. And so we look for confirmation, and that might completely not be a fair reflection of reality. So very quickly we end up in these stories that are negative, and we go about finding evidence that confirms them. And so one of the biggest practices that has been really beneficial for me, and it gets written off so much, is the practice of a gratitude journal. And there's really good evidence behind this in positive psychology. They call the exercise three blessings. And um, it's simply at the end of the day, with pen and paper, writing down what are three good things that happened in your day, or what are three things that you're grateful for. But really importantly, it's about writing down why those good things happened, or why you're grateful for them, because it connects it deeper into your being. And like this has like clinically valid outcomes for up to 6 months afterwards when people do it for just 2 weeks. Like it's really remarkable in terms of how it shifts people's outlook and well-being in measurable ways. And the reason that it's so valid is because this isn't about like happy clappy positive thinking, just be grateful, everything's fine. It's not about that at all. What it is about is bringing more balance, because we have this negative dominant thinking. When we actively practice gratitude, we become more aware of the things that are good in our life. So 10 things, 9 things that were good could have happened today, or in a performance review, and the one area that's to be worked on is all you can think about. And so, actively creating a little bit of space in your day to think about what are the things that were good that happened today, makes you more aware of those things. And over time, um, that starts to let us see the world in a lot more balanced way, and the stories don't become as negative. The second thing that we can really do is actively challenge those stories, because you know this is the thing of, are you your biggest critic or your best friend? Um, and like I found myself in the scenario of being my biggest critic a lot of times, and actively taking the space and the time to challenge the narrative in my mind is so important. Because if someone else spoke to me like that, if a friend to me like that, I wouldn't take it. And yet we do it to ourselves. And so actively, like actually catching ourselves and then thinking, well, hold on a second, that's not true. Or at least let me entertain the fact that it might not be true. And actually let me entertain the fact that the entirely opposite story might be just as valid. And so I think there are two really important things that we can do, um, that are simple practices. In positive, if you want to think about positive psychology, it just, you've mentioned it. They talk a lot about well-being, and the way that's measured, and it's measured in a way called PERMA, and PERMA stands for positive emotion, engagement. So engagement means flow. People might be more familiar with flow. PER, or is relationships, M is meaning, and A is accomplishment. And these are like some of the dominant things that are measurable, that have a real impact in our lives. So positive emotion, um, in our lives, if we cultivate and actively include in our days, in our weeks, in our months, activities that lead to us having positive emotion, or engage in activities that give us positive emotion, understandably our well-being is going to go up. Like it's called the broaden and build theory. So regularly, like if we have people on our team, if we have people in our friend group, if we're engaging with activities that make us feel good and give us positive emotion, it opens us to have more open-minded thinking. It makes us more creative. It makes us more resilient. It allows us to demonstrate our strengths more often. All of these kind of things, we give ourselves more permission. to take risks. Like all of these kind of things happen. The second area of engagement or flow is engaging with activities where you lose a track of time. You're completely consumed in the
Yeah.
activity. Like for you, that might look like being in the gym. Like that might be where you completely lose track of time. You're just totally in the moment. Um, and time goes by, and all of a sudden you like realize, holy shit, like I haven't eaten for ages. Or you might be like completely consumed in a book, or it might be like that you're just on a goods strong. If you're in sales or something, you might be on like a back to back to back really good calls. Or if you're into
Yeah.
music, you might just completely lose yourself in the song, and you lose all sense of time. You lose sense of like your awareness of your body, and you might realize, Jesus, I haven't gone to the toilet in hours, or I haven't eaten in hours. And you lose an awareness of like any narrative or chatter. And the reason is that we talk about the stretch zone. When you're in flow, you're ever so slightly in the stretch zone. And these are activities where we're engaging like the best of our character traits, and we're stretching ourselves ever so slightly. So all our cognitive demands go into that activity. So that's another way that you can really increase your well-being, is by engaging activities that give you that kind of response. The third way is relationships. So like the relationships in our life, we're always relating either to ourselves or other people. And the quality of our relationships has a huge prediction to the quality of our lives. Like if you look at any of the long-term studies of people that live the longest, that are the happiest and so on, they're they have really good close relationships. It doesn't have to be many, it only needs to be a couple. Maybe they're a part of a community of some sort, or a club, or an organization, or maybe it's just that they have a few people in their life that they trust and check in with regularly. But actively taking time to cultivate those type of things is essential. Um, the final two are meaning and accomplishment. Um, Events are just events, right? So events generally are neutral. The only thing that makes them good or bad is the meaning that we attach to them.
Yeah.
And it's the same with our lives. If we choose to seek meaning and see meaning in the things that we do, that's really, really important. And the final thing is accomplishment. Accomplishment isn't for the CV. It's actually to give you to give you a sense that you're moving forward in some way in your life. And accomplishments don't have to be a promotion in work. Accomplishment could be building a birdhouse for the back garden.
Yeah.
Do you know, accomplishment could be cooking a meal from a new cookbook. Accomplishment could be doing your first 5 kilometer walk or run. Like it could be any in any part of your life, but having little small milestones that you're working towards, all of these things, when you compound them together, they're really positively reinforcing and lead to dramatic increases in our well-being, in our sense of self-worth, the value that we place in ourselves, and importantly, the most important thing is the relationship that we have with ourselves. um, when some of those things are in place, the relationship we have with ourselves just increases, and that's the most valuable thing of all, because if we're good with ourselves, we'll be better with everything else in life.
Yes, Jack. I mean, that was action packed in terms of the amount of stuff there that we can go into. I think the first things first, you're singing from the same hymn sheet when it comes to gratitude. Very probably March last year, I started my gratitude journal and I've not looked back since. And I banged on and on and on about the 6 minute diary is what I use. And it has that piece at the start around 3 pieces of things that you're grateful for. And then it recaps in the evening with 3 great things that happened during the day. So yeah, we're certainly singing from the same hymn sheet and certainly preaching to the right audience on that one. I think a lot of the guys have got involved in that and they've really, really benefited. And then when you talk about self-talk and the dialogue and how we view ourselves, it relates back to a lot of the things that we've covered throughout the rest of this episode, but equally it just helps to reinforce that that's exactly what we're looking to accomplish from from our kind of ability to be proactive in our health. And then last but not least, where do you start with PERMA? I think that would be, there was just mic drop moment after mic drop moment in terms of within the different little things that we can do to improve our well-being. And during this time when we are potentially challenged more than ever, particularly for people who've maybe not experienced the same challenges that you have at your stage in life, or potentially on the same scale. COVID has probably been the kind of first real road bump for a lot of people when it's come to how they've dealt with being locked away, maybe losing their job or losing their ability to go out to work or go to the gym or do whatever they've got to do. So there's still lots of things that we can do within the PERMA framework to meet those needs, I would hope. And I think that was an incredible way for us to start to close off the episode, Jack. So the last thing I would ask you, Jack, is where's the best place for people to connect with you? And I'll make sure it's linked in the show notes.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, thanks so much for having me. You're an amazing interviewer, and I love what you're all about. It's incredible. So thank you. People can find me on all the platforms. Jack Kavanagh IRL is my handle. IRL is for Ireland, so Jack Kavanagh IRL. Um, my website is jack-kavanagh.com, and if you're interested in watching the Breaking Boundaries documentary, which has actually was only recently re-aired on Virgin One, but if you want to watch that, that's on my website, and you can get access to my TED Talk and a number of other talks that I've done there as well.
Superb, Jack. I've absolutely loved this conversation. If you too, as a listener, have enjoyed it, please take a screenshot, pop it in your Instagram story, tag Jack, tag myself. I'm also going to pop the link in the show notes to the viastrengths.org website for people to explore a little bit more about themselves and give them something really actionable to do off the back of this. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I'll be back to speak to you all again very, very soon.